happen. And so that's part of it too, is understanding in a real world situation what it takes to work for yourself or start your own company or something. And it takes a lot of grit, and it takes a lot of time, it takes money, and it takes perseverance. It's just not easy. And that's why most people don't do it.
Welcome to Insights into Success. We're with your host, Paul Dodds. We hope to educate, inspire, and motivate you to achieve your own personal success. We talk to guests from all around the world from a variety of walks of life to hear the realities of their own journey to success. What challenges have they faced? How have they coped with failure? And what have been the keys or will be the keys to their own success? In our Read to Succeed interviews, we talk books that have inspired our guests, and for some, they share their secrets to marketing success. Join us as we give you insights into success. Welcome to Insights into Success. Welcome to Kelly. It's a real pleasure to finally have you on board for this interview. I'm looking forward to talking to you, particularly you're an author, and I'm really interested. I've never written a book, so I'm interested to hear about your journey in reading. And I also want to acknowledge that you come from Colorado, which is a lovely state I've been to. I've worked in Keystone, Colorado when I finished university, ski field there, and skied in Keystone, Breckenridge, Copper Mountain, Steamboat, etc. So it's a beautiful part of the world.
It is.
You know, I mean, I think people talk a lot about New Zealand and how beautiful New Zealand is, but the reality is New Zealand is really just a segment of a lot of countries around the world jammed into one little country. You know, you go to Colorado and there's parts of Colorado is equally as beautiful, if not more beautiful than New Zealand. But often people don't give countries like America probably the credit for the beauty that it has because it's over such an expanse. Whereas in New Zealand, you can 1 minute be thinking you're in Colorado, next minute you could be in the the Caribbean, on a beach in the Caribbean or whatever. So it's all like jammed in a small country. So it's not that we're actually more beautiful. It's just it's packed in a small area.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. But anyway, I love traveling. I've traveled around America quite a bit. So, it's an interesting experience. Anyway, let's get into it. And I think the first thing, Kelly, I wanted to do is just get you to tell us a little bit about yourself and what exactly it is that you do.
Okay, I'm a professional speaker and author. Along with professional speaking, I often do some consulting from clients, usually who hear me on stage, talking and doing a keynote about topics. And my brand or my stake in the ground is people not like you. So 23 years ago, I started talking about how to market and sell to people not like you, and how to work with people not like you, and then customer experience for people not like you. And it kind of just grew and grew and grew and grew. And so today I really focus from my speaking side of my business, speaking at conferences and at corporate events, on really major business topics, the broad ones like sales, marketing, leadership, customer experience, but also people and culture. And that's really where business is these days. And that's where my home is. I started with that anyway. And I really think that's a trend in business to think about people and culture rather than a fad. And a fad comes and goes like fast, but a trend is a shift. And, one of my clients actually said it best. He said, this is all that anybody cares about right now. He said, everyone has technology. Everyone has competitive pricing. Everyone has good products, like if you're looking at who your major competitors are. So the only thing that really differentiates your company and your company's success is your people and your culture, and I thought that was a really great insight.
It is. It's so true. So true. So how did you get into this? Like what was the catalyst for you to start writing books and become a successful author? Was there a particular moment in time, a particular event that really sparked everything?
Yes, I had an experience that is completely unusual to people who write books. Most people who write books have always wanted to write a book, and they feel they have something to say, and then they do. They write a book. Yeah. That was not my experience at all. And I actually don't usually talk about this because it ticks off everybody I know who has been trying to write a book for 10 years. So I've been a professional speaker for 23 years, and one of my first and most successful topics that was driving, 80% of my business at the time, 15 years ago, was this topic called how to market to people not like you, or how to market and sell to people not like you.
Yeah.
And Wiley, my publisher, and Wiley is the largest publisher of business books in the world, came across the name of my speech, my keynote, like came across my PowerPoint somewhere, and
Nice.
thought that was a really interesting title. And I got a call from my editor, Richard Naramore at Wiley, and I'm just never going to forget this. I had just landed in Austin. It was a Friday night, and I have this voicemail. I'm listening to my voicemail when I land, and it's like, "Hi, Kelly, this is Richard Naramore from Wiley Publishing. I'd like to talk to you." And that's a phone call you return right away.
Yeah, sure.
So I call him back, and it's a Friday night, and I'm on Central Time in the U.S., and he's in New York, so he's on Eastern Time. And it's like 6:00 in New York. And I'm thinking, there's no way he's going to be there. I'm just going to leave him a voicemail so that he knows I got his voicemail, and I'll say, maybe we can connect next week. Well, he picks up, Paul, and we start talking. And I keep trying to get out of the conversation to be polite. I'm like, look, it's a Friday night. I'm sure you've got a nice glass of Chardonnay waiting for you or something, And he goes, no, this is good. Let's talk. We talked for an hour and a half. And he wanted to know what I meant by how to market to people not like you, and where I came up with that phrase and all this kind of stuff. And at the end of that conversation, he said, "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, I think you've got a book there." And so then he sent me a book proposal, and he said, here's our template, fill this out. He kind of coached me through that, and I got a book deal.
Wow. That's a unique way.
It became a bestseller. And like any blockbuster movie or bestseller, if your book is selling well, they want another one. And so I wrote the second one, and then I wrote a third, and then that became a bestseller, and then I wrote a third, that became a bestseller, and then I wrote a fourth. And I had never ever envisioned that was going to be part of my life, ever. And I guess the one lesson I would say to your viewers and listeners is, what I learned from that, and what I still try to really apply today, is say yes to everything that comes to you, or that you come across. Because I never wanted to do that. I never dreamed I would do that. It had never entered my mind. And in fact, when he asked me to write a book, I was really, really busy. I was doing like 90 engagements a year. I mean, you're just gone all the time. Yeah. And I, it was like having a second job. And I can tell you that the very first conference call that we had, when he called me to congratulate me and said, "You have a book deal." And I was like, "Oh my God," I'm shrieking. I'm sitting in a rental car outside the headquarters of State Farm, where I had just finished speaking. It was just really weird where you were, And he said, "Okay, so congratulations. We're going to FedEx you the contract and FedEx it back and all that stuff." And then he said, "So let's set up a conference call for 3 weeks from today. And I want to see chapter 1, chapter 9, and chapter 16. And all of a sudden I realized I have a job. Like this, I didn't just have like 5 months to write a book. There's a system.
Wow.
Well, they don't want you to just wait till the end and then you turn in a book and it's garbage. I learned all about how to write a book. Let me tell you, I learned all about it.
That would have been such a shock in the beginning, having not had any experience, and then suddenly you've been told this. It'll be like, where do I start?
3 weeks. Well, you have an outline. Part of a book proposal is basically your table of contents, and what you're going to cover. It's an outline, essentially. And so all of that was there. But I mean, I just never knew that he was going to be, cracking the whip like that. Like, okay, in 3 weeks, I want 3 chapters. I thought I had I had 5 months to write a book. That was in the contract, but I thought I could just kind of do it at my pace. And I thought I was going to go in a very linear way, like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. And he said, "No, I want to see the trajectory." It was hard. It was really hard.
That would be hard. That would be a real shock.
Yep.
So tell me, taking a step back though, how did you get into public speaking? Because that's a curious thing in itself. And for most people, that would spin them out, into absolute nervousness, the thought of being a public speaker.
Oh,
So
yeah.
tell me about that and whether you naturally, are comfortable with it or whether that was a journey in itself.
No, I've always been comfortable with it. And, I think we're like in the, we professional speakers are in that weird, 1/10 of 1% of the population that is okay with public speaking. And, I'm sure
Yeah.
you've read the studies that show that, people fear public speaking, number one, like that's the most fearful thing, and dying, number two. So they would actually rather die than do it. But, so I'm fortunate that I just never had that kind of stage fright. And so prior to becoming a professional speaker and making that my profession, I was in the advertising agency industry, working with global ad agencies on big accounts like Budweiser and Toyota and things like that. And all you do when you are in that business is make presentations to your clients.
Yeah.
That's all you're doing is making, here's a problem, here's the strategy, here's the competitive, analysis. Here's what we need to do from a marketing standpoint. Here's what that's going to look like on a television ad or, whatever it is. And you doing that all the time. And so, but it's a really high burnout business. And so there's a joke in the advertising industry that says you get in your 20s and you get out in your 40s because you're just done, you're burned out. And that happened to me. And I was also doing very, very well in that industry. And the higher you go in advertising, the less you're actually close to the advertising work. You're just doing management,
Right.
So it was becoming less gratifying for me, and I was getting utterly burned out. And so I decided that I needed a change. I decided that I'd had enough, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. But I was a one-trick pony. I mean, like from the moment I graduated from college to this moment where I was 42 years old, that's all I had ever done. I was very, very good at it. I was very successful. And so all of a sudden I'm like, well, what's my trick now? If I don't. So I was reading a lot of books and articles on how you can find, sort of your gifts or whatever. And there was one in particular, there was like one paragraph in one book that I read, and it just like, it just, changed everything for me. And it said, if you want to find out where your natural gifts are, because that's a good place to start if you're going to start your own business. What am I good at?
Exactly.
Then think back to every time you've ever gotten an attaboy or an attagirl, that high five from a boss, that high five from a client or a coworker, whatever. What were you doing? And so I thought about it a lot, and I kept coming back to every single time I got recognition in my role from clients. It was always, wow, Kelly, you can take the most complicated information and make it easy for me to understand. I could listen to you present data. I could listen to you, shape a story, whatever it is, all day long. And so I realized my gift is I have a way of communicating information in a way that makes sense to people and that they find consumable. So then I was like, okay, how do I monetize that? It's a nice gift. I'd be a good teacher. In other words, I'd be a good teacher. And that's really what I feel like I am, actually, is I'm an educator, right? It's just, I do it from a stage instead of a classroom, but it's kind of the same principle. And so then I just thought, well, how do I monetize this? So, I started thinking about professional speaking, and then how do you do that? And you just start, and you start by doing a bunch of freebies and a bunch of low fee things. And you say yes to everything that comes your way. And I must have done, I'll bet I did 75 or 80 free speaking engagements the first year that I was trying to get this going at little, Chamber of Commerce meetings, and just trying to get out there. And it worked.
And a lot of that, does it become word of mouth, that you've gone and done those free ones and then you get the referrals from there?
Yeah. And I'll tell anybody who's listening or watching that, the one thing that I think is really important to realize is that if you're doing something for free for someone, because I did just a zillion of these little free things. Nobody knows it's free except you and your client. Everybody else there thinks you're getting paid. Let them think that, because when they call you and they say, what's your fee? Boom, you're a professional speaker. But you got to have a topic that's going to sell. And my topic was how to market to people not like you.
Right. And how did that come about? What was the inspiration for that?
The ad agency that I was working for right before I ended up leaving and going out on my own was a Texas-based Hispanic ad agency focusing on the Latino market in the U.S. and the growing Latino market, which between 1990 and 2000, the Hispanic population, especially in Texas, grew exponentially. And we were being inundated once the census came out, and we could actually quantify how big that, what I call the size of the prize was. And we were getting, inquiries from major global brands and US brands like, General Mills was calling and saying, do we need to make dulce de leche Cheerios? And Levi Strauss is calling and saying, what kind of jeans do Mexican men specifically, because, there's a lot of population from Mexico in Texas. What kind of jeans do Mexican men like to wear? Do they like Levi's, or do they like Wranglers, or do they like something else? Everybody wanted to know, how do we tap into that market? And so we were doing a lot of that. And then what was happening is our clients were going, well, we don't just value the Latino market. That's the one that's like really important right now, right in front of our face. But we value all different kinds of clients. And so I realized that there was a need for this, and that, again, if you're Toyota, you've got, $1 billion ad budget. But what about a small local business who wants to grow their business with the customers that they're not getting, but they could be, if they had the consumer insights on how to tap into that? Sure. So that's how it started. Yeah.
Wow. And that kind of then makes sense with one of the topics of your book, which I wanted to talk about now, because you're really passionate about diversity in the workplace. So I can now see where this has all come about. But yeah, so the passion for that, presumably it's all interconnected to your experience in the ad agency, and it's really flowed through from there. Is that kind of how it's sort of developed?
That's the business side of it. I think that's the business side of it, which is it became very clear to me that diversity is a tool in business. It's a positive tool that can propel business forward. If you're getting customers that are different from your core customers that maybe you built your core customer base around, you're already successful with that. How much more successful could you be, if you could expand the customer base? So I was fascinated from the business side of that. It's just good for business. But then the people side of it too, internally and everything, just the most successful companies are the ones that have a global outlook on opportunity and a global commitment, or a local, it doesn't always have to be global, but just to different kinds of talent, and recognizing that that's what propels innovation forward, is somebody else, someone like you, let's say if I'm talking to you and you say, Kelly, what if, and that never occurred to me, whatever, that's where the magic happens. The magic happens when people who have different perspectives and backgrounds and views and likes and dislikes and stuff, when they come together and they start talking, that's what innovation is. Yeah. And, whether it's customer service insights or whether it's product insights, that's where the magic is. It was just such an obvious low-hanging fruit opportunity, I thought. And now we've been talking about it for, 2 decades, but this was revolutionary back in, 2002 when I started doing this. Nobody was talking about diversity. In fact, I was the only professional speaker in the country that was talking about it. The only one.
Wow. And can you talk a little bit about diversity and what you mean about it? Obviously the natural gravitation is to think in terms of racial diversity, but it can be defined as much more than that. So can you talk to me a little bit about that?
You bet. I have always defined diversity, even back in 2002, as any way that you can be different from me. So for example, Paul, if I'm on stage and I'm talking to a group of bankers, I might choose a woman who's sitting in the front row, and I might say, okay, and she's white, and let's say she looks like she might be close in age to me. And I'll pick her out and I'll say, what's your name? And she says, Kathy. And I say, okay, Kathy. So we're both white, we're both women, and we're roughly the same age. And I'll say, do you have children? And she'll say 99% of the time, she'll say yes. And I'll say, I don't. So we could live in the same zip code. We could have the same household income, be the same race, be the same age, be in the same profession, everything.
Yeah.
All of that being the same. On the surface, we would look the same. But if she has kids and I don't, we're actually going to be really different.
Yeah.
because the way that she makes decisions and the pressures and priorities on her as a parent are very different than mine. That has nothing to do with the color of our skin or how old we are, or
Yeah.
how much money we make. And so what I like to do is just talk about it as people not like you. And so my definition of diversity is any way that you can be different from me. And a lot of times, obviously people kind of go to the obvious ones like, race, age, gender, that kind of thing, abilities or disabilities, sexual identification, all that. But what about someone who's an engineer, Paul, versus somebody who's a graphic designer? Their brains work totally different.
Totally differently. Yeah.
Yeah, or I do a lot of professional speaking in the insurance industry. Well, the insurance industry, of course, has insurance sales executives, but they also have actuaries who are going, what's the likelihood that Paul's going to get into a this year? Let's run the numbers,
Yeah.
right? So somebody who's an analyst, like an actuary, is completely different than somebody who's in sales.
Yeah.
And someone who's in the accounting department at a company is different than HR. Somebody who's a pessimist is different than someone who's an optimist.
Mm.
Someone who's been working for 30 years is different than somebody who's been working for 90 days. I mean, like you can go anywhere with this, and that's exactly what I try to get people to do is like think about all the ways that people can be different from you. An introvert is different than an extrovert. Risk takers are very different than people who are risk averse. The list just you can just keep going and going and going. And that's where I feel that the magic happens with when you're really truly talking about diversity. It's way beyond race, ethnicity, age, gender. Those are just very surface things, and they're important.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of ways that we can be very, very, very different from one another.
So,
and I think
given
people like that. I think people like thinking about like, oh, people not like me. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so true because how far do you take it? Like taking your example before about you and another person, you said about the children, but then it gets to the next level. Like she might be an introvert and you're an extrovert, and she might be a night person, you're a morning person, and so on. There's all these different elements that can then come into it.
Someone who's in the military or has served in the military in the past is very different than someone who has not. Someone who lives in a loft in Tokyo or Manhattan or London is very different than someone who lives on a rural farm. I mean, it just, there's no limit to how we can think about people not like you.
So given that, how do we recognize the differences within the workforce and then embrace that for the betterment of the business? Like, how do we do that? Because we all come to work, we all might look fairly similar or what have you, but then how do you as an employer start to unearth the differences and then take advantage of those differences for the betterment of the business?
Yeah. That's a great question because a lot of organizations will be like, okay, we've diversified our pipeline and we have new people here, and then it kind of is like, now what? Just because you have different backgrounds doesn't mean you've harnessed the potential that those diverse perspectives bring. Okay, so
exactly.
What the role of the leader is to do is what I call listening labs, and that sounds really formal, and I don't mean that. It can literally be the hallway conversations, but the real magic is in talking to people about, first of all, what is the company's goal? Because you can talk about diversity all day long, but if you're not applying it to like a direction or a goal, or what does this mean for us with what we're trying to do, okay? And goals are where all business conversations start, whether we're trying to grow our business, whether we're trying to develop new products or services, whether we're, whatever the goal is, everybody needs to learn that and understand that first and be on board with what are we doing here? What are we trying to do now? And because presumably you're already successful as a company, if you've even got employees, right? You're doing something right. So now what, right? And then once that goal is clearly established and you put a stake in the ground, that's when the leader really has the opportunity to have ongoing conversations with diverse teams in the organization And they can have conversations by themselves as well about, does anyone here have any business or life experience that could apply to what we're doing relative to this goal? And I love framing it that way, any business or life experience.
Yeah.
Because sometimes somebody might say, well, you know what, my sister works at a company, here's what they're doing, and it's a really great tactic and it's working for them, or something like that. We all do that kind of collaboration sharing. But a lot of times real insights come from the lived experiences that people have and the way that they see the world. And that is insight that you can't get any other way other than talking. There is no other way to get that, So to have, with every step in an organization, the goals that are being established, the progress on those goals being achieved, new developments that might take you into a left turn, or a right turn or something, that's the dynamic, state of business, is keep talking to the people in the organization and giving them opportunities to talk, to find out, what do you think we should do? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? And keeping your ear very close to the ground with your customers. And usually it's not the leader who's doing that. It's either, employees or staff. They're the ones that are interfacing with suppliers and customers.
What I like about how you just framed it before was you're inviting people with business knowledge, but also personal knowledge to contribute. Like, you could have employees that feel like maybe they haven't been around long enough and feel like they've really got the business experience to share. But by framing it the way you did, enables people to feel like they can contribute even if they're not very experienced in the business sense, because they can contribute from a personal sense, personal experience.
I can give you a really good example of Colorado. I mean, this is a somewhat dated example, but the ski industry is everything in Colorado, right? It literally brings billions of dollars of tourism to our state. It's incredibly important. And the ski industry was, several years ago, experiencing a decline in skiers because their established customer skiers were getting older. They were getting older.
Right.
So they'd had knee replacements. They were now 60. They're afraid of getting injured. No, seriously. Like, this is like the case study. I talk about it in one of my books. And so their numbers of skiers were declining. And they were like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So what they started to do is like, okay, well, we need new blood in the pipeline. And they started talking, again, like focus groups and just conversations with younger people and saying, do you ski? And all these younger people were like, no. And they were like, why don't you ski? You're in Colorado. And they're like, that's my parents' sport. Ew. Okay. So, and then secondly, they were like, I don't like to ski. I like to snowboard. That was their sport. Okay.
Yeah.
But then they said, but we're not allowed to snowboard on the ski hills. So we have to go into the backcountry. So they never saw them. The ski industry never saw these snowboarders. Right. And so they were like, oh, wow. And they were banished from the ski hills. And so then they found out problem number one was, you're not allowing snowboarding, and that's what we want to do. Okay, that's a pretty big insight right there. How can we get these guys on and these people on the hill? Number two was, it's really expensive. So then they started working with the rental equipment companies, the ski lifts, to bring the prices down and to start, doing packages. And then that started doing ski lift sharing at the different places in Colorado: Vail, Aspen, Steamboat, Winter Park. Instead of like them competing, they were like, let's work together to build demand for snowboarding. And it saved their industry. It saved their industry.
Just by listening.
Just by talking to people and going, how come you don't ski? Everything
asking the
out.
questions. Amazing.
That's free. That's a free conversation with huge insights. Every one of them was a problem that could be remedied, and they did remedy them. And it saved the industry. Yeah.
It's crazy, isn't it? Because it seems so obvious, but then obviously it wasn't being done.
Right. All they knew is that their numbers were declining, and they're like, I wonder why. And then they start talking to the older skiers and, doing focus groups and stuff. People are like, yeah, I just had a knee surgery. I don't want to get out there. I'm afraid to fall. I'm not as, good as I used to be. And it scares me now because I'm 63 or, whatever. I mean, that's like, you can't get those insights any other way.
Yeah. Yeah. So for a business, like what you're saying makes sense, but how do businesses actually integrate that into the way they operate to be constantly have a structure that they've constantly been able to get that feedback from people and utilize the different perspectives? I mean, how do you actually integrate that into the business?
Well, one thing is never stop talking to your customers and suppliers. And one of the questions that you can ask is pretty much what the ski industry did. And that is, if you could change one thing about us, what would it be?
Right.
Not what don't you like about us, because your best customers are going to go, I love you. I love everything about you. They're your best customers. So you won't get a good answer there. But if you ask anybody, if you could change one thing about us, what would it be? Everybody can come up with one thing. And then the other thing is, don't get defensive when they tell you. They just need to favor, right? So it's that, but then that's from the outside looking in. Let's talk to customers and suppliers about what they think about our business. What do they need from us that they're not getting? How can we improve? If you could change one thing about us, what would it be? Listen very carefully to those answers. And then from the employee side, employee resource groups have, in my opinion, have been largely underutilized. They're a great idea that started with how can we bring more diversity and have the people who are in fact diverse driving efforts going forward into how we can continue to do more of this in relevant ways, right? But a lot of it became very internal. Like, we want to have a women's leadership luncheon. Okay, that's great. We can all benefit from ongoing learning and development. But if you can harness the power of the ERGs within an organization, employee resource groups, and say, what does this population that you represent or that you have experience with, what can we do better to be more relevant to that group?
Yeah.
So whether it's, first responders, or whether it's, military veterans, or whether it's women, or whether it's Black, or whether it's Asian, or whether it's Hispanic, or whether it's LGBTQ, what can we do as an organization to be more relevant? Because that's how you get the perspectives going and the diversity of thought that is going to drive the business forward in ways that if you're not part of that group, you might not ever conceive of.
And so I'm just thinking from a small business point of view, getting back to what you were saying before about getting feedback from your customers. For a small business, how would that look? Are we talking like as in a formal questionnaire? Are we talking about interviews? I mean, how would a small business implement that?
I think it's a conversation, Paul, because number one, I think a questionnaire is very formal and you're only going to get the answers to what you ask, right? Here's 8 questions. I answer them.
Yeah.
There's nothing more. Conversations can take those twists and turns where you get into really interesting stuff. But what I would recommend is that you start with your best customers, the ones that will be happy to talk to you. And you never want to make more work for them. That's another reason I don't like the questionnaire. It's like, oh, really? I got to fill out this form?
Yeah.
So if I were, let's say, a bakery, a small bakery, and I've got these loyal customers that love me and I love them back, and I might say, you know what? I would really like your help with something. I need your help. I would like to know why you love our bakery. And I would like to have a 15 or 20-minute conversation. Don't make it an hour. It might go an hour, but that's up to your customer's choice, right?
Yeah.
So I would like to have 15 or 20 minutes with you the next time you come in, or at your convenience. Let's sit down and have a cup of coffee. I have some things I'd like to ask you about what it's like doing business with us and how could we be better, And that way it becomes a pleasant conversation where nobody is like, oh, this is a trick question. All right. And then reward those customers and say, I realize that if you offer to help me, or you're willing to help me with this, that you're going to be giving me 15 or 20 minutes or maybe 30 minutes of your time. And what I would like to do back for you is whatever, maybe it's a basket of baked goods for your team, next week. I want to recognize that you're helping me because you are one of our best customers. You know us better than anybody. You are a loyal customer. What are we doing right? And if you could change one thing, what would it be? And just let that conversation happen, because you never know where it's going to go. Don't sit there with your 3 questions and, okay, here's our 3 questions. Now we're done. Let the conversation, I mean, you're going to need a kickoff question or 2, but I mean, the organic nature of conversations like that can be gold, absolute gold. And do the same with your employees. Can I give you a really recent example that is just amazing to me?
Sure.
So there's a large printing company that's a national chain in the US. And so whether you want the side of a bus, with signage on it, or whether you want, interior signage at an airport, or what, any kind of printed, slick, beautiful signage.
Yeah.
So this particular location of the business hired their very first deaf employee. All right. So he works on the printing presses, or, some kind of machinery that makes the signs and stuff like that. And it was the employees. So this isn't about customers. It was the employees who actually realized what they needed, because when the printers, these huge, big printers, are out of ink or running low on color, there's an alarm. Beep, beep.
Yeah.
You can't hear it if you're deaf.
No.
So they realized quickly that this guy couldn't hear that, and when something needed to be fixed. And so they started working by calling the manufacturer of those printing things and saying, is there a light that you could be added to this that will flash as well as the alarm?
Yeah.
I mean, how great is that?
Simple.
That only comes from talking to people and saying, what are you experiencing? Because if that company had gone into their customers, including, these print shops, and said, what do you like about us? Oh, you're great. You're fast. Your machines are fast, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But then if they said, what else could we do to make it better? And somebody said, we have an employee who's deaf and he can't hear the alarms. But what if we had a flashing light? I mean, I couldn't believe, once I was told this story by my client, that wasn't already happening. I was like, that is so obvious once you point it out to me. So obvious. But not until you ask.
No, exactly. It's interesting, isn't it? That different perspective.
You can't get that perspective any other way than by talking to people who are different from you.
Yeah.
I'll bet you nobody's ever given one bit of thought to working with those machines who has full hearing. You wouldn't even
you take it for granted. Yeah, you take it for granted. And that's can translate to, there might be other examples, for instance, where you're potentially, some of your customers might be deaf or blind, for instance, and you haven't thought about how you might need to target them differently because of their situation.
Mm-hmm.
But by talking to them, that you get that perspective that you otherwise don't have, and then suddenly opens up new
Here's
opportunity.
another one that's very recent. I fly United Airlines a lot because they have a big hub in Denver. And they're a global airline, of course. And I was so proud of them. I'm a pretty rabid fan of United, but I was so proud of them because they're the very first airline that committed to putting the seat numbers in Braille on the armrest. Because blind people, or people who are eyesight impaired, would literally have to, maybe they know that their seat is 19D, but they would have to walk down the aisle and keep asking people, what seat are you? Oh, you're 13. Okay, keep going. And now they can just sort of feel their way.
Yeah, I know, just something like that.
Yeah.
So why do you think most employers have been so slow to recognize the differences within the workforce and then take advantage of that? Why do you think that has been the case for so long?
Success. I mean, when you're successful, a lot of the mentality is like, we're good. We don't need to do anything. We can't mess it up now. I mean, so success breeds, I don't want to say complacency, of course, that is a phrase, success breeds complacency. But a lot of times it's like, we're making money, we're doing well. Our sales are good. Our customer satisfaction is good. Our customer loyalty, our stock price is up, whatever the metrics are. The more successful you are, the more it is easy to not want to change things. But by having conversations, and sometimes conversations don't lead to change, but having the conversations, that's what leads to innovation. And innovation is where it's at. Because going all the way back to where we started, where I was telling you that a client of mine said, we all have technology, we all have competitive pricing, we all have good products. It's people and culture. And the innovation doesn't come from a machine. Innovation comes from up here, from people thinking differently about an idea or a product or a service or a situation. And I think, so I would say to all of your listeners and your viewers is just, congratulations on your success. That's a wonderful thing. But how much more successful could you be if you could get the customers that you're not getting, but you could be, or you could do better with the customers that you are getting, as well as expanding your customer base.
And I think, one of the things that I've learned from my business experience, but also through talking to people with this podcast, is that you must keep evolving. You might be successful, but you cannot stay still, because if you stay still, you'll get left behind, and you might be successful for the moment, but inevitably that success will dwindle. You've got to constantly be evolving. You can't just go, okay, I've made it, I'm here, that's it, put my feet up. It doesn't work like that. So it's so important to keep evolving. What you're talking about opens up the communication to potentially continue to evolve.
And that's it. That's the benefit of innovation. I mean, innovation isn't just so you can pat yourself on the back and go, wow, we have these new products. It's because you want to sell those products to people who want them, and that's where business success really soars, is you're already good at your core business. How can you make it better? And
so from businesses that you have come across that have sort of adopted your philosophy and have really looked to embrace diversity and incorporate that into what they do and feeding off the knowledge from that, to what extent have you seen businesses flourish because of that strategy?
Oh, no one who's ever worked on expanding the diverse talent in their organization. And again, I'm not just talking racially or ethnically, it could be generations. Anyway, diversity always works. Always. I mean, literally, it's been proven in study after study after study as diverse teams outperform non-diverse teams. There's never been a study that proves otherwise on every metric in which we measure business success: sales, profit, customer retention, customer satisfaction, employee retention, employee satisfaction, you name it. I mean, it's been proven. So the organizations that are not putting their arms around this and going, wow, maybe we could, do better and be better in this area, they're missing out. And the organizations that are embracing this are wildly successful. I mean, one of my clients, Zebra Technologies, I'm thinking about them. They're a global company. What's cool about global companies is they're inherently diverse.
Yes, yeah.
They're inherently diverse, and so they've got people all over the globe. They're working in different cultures. They have different holidays, time zones. I mean, you name it. And what happens with that is, almost without trying, that diverse global employee pool creates innovation. Right? Yeah. Why don't we do it this way? Here's a really old example, but it's a really great example. L'Oreal, arguably the largest beauty, manufacturer in the world. They started in France, and their first products were with Parisian hairdressers and dye, hair color.
Yeah.
In the early 1900s. And then as they evolved and became more established as a beauty company, they realized, you know what? People all over the world look different. Their skin tones are not the same. The shape of their eyes are not the same, et cetera, et cetera. And what's beautiful in terms of makeup and hair color and all that kind of stuff in one country might differ from another. And so they became successful by getting out of France. I mean, they were still in France, but by going, wait a minute, there's a whole
Yeah.
world of beauty out there, all different kinds of women. And then eventually they started marketing to men. They were like, wait a minute, guys want to look good too, you know? And so all of that is just people not like you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a great example, really, isn't it? If you think of yeah, that industry, because there is such diversity and people, yeah, have such different expectations. So to be a global company in that industry, you have to embrace it and target it in each respective market.
Right. And they didn't just and then obviously they had a global employees or whatever. So the employees themselves were the ones that are saying, you know,
Yeah,
this is the kind of product that we need in Australia. This is the kind of product that we want in Tokyo. This is the kind of, you know, and so driving the insights that made their products relevant to customers.
yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I hadn't really thought about that, but that's a great industry for it because it is so different. And even between the countries, like you said, even close countries like New Zealand and Australia. I mean, what New Zealand and Australian women will want is quite different to other countries. Like our sun, we have, particularly over here, unfortunately, our ozone layer is thinner because of what's happened in the northern hemisphere. So our sun is very strong. You're more inclined to get sunburnt here, for instance. So
Right.
that's a factor that needs to be taken into account as opposed
Absolutely.
to somewhere else.
And you don't need that as much, you know, in another part of the world, like, I don't
Mm,
know, in the Midwest and, you know, in even in the summer, the Midwest, you know, is cloudy because of the lake effect of the Great Lakes, you know, so Wisconsin,
right.
you know, and so I live in Colorado and I had to completely, when I moved here 10 years ago, completely revamp my entire skincare program. I mean, I've never gone through so much hand lotion, body lotion, lip balm. It's so dry here. And
Right.
I had never
Yeah.
really given much serious thought to sunscreen until I moved here. And we have
Yeah.
320 days of sunshine a year, and we're literally closer to the sun because of the
Yeah.
altitude. So it's like very
Yeah.
intense here. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, how would you know that unless you're talking to people
Yeah. No,
and saying, what
exactly.
do you need?
That's a great example. So for you, what's in the future for you? What's your goals going forward from here?
One of my goals, great question. Nobody's ever asked that for me before. One of my goals is I've been doing the professional speaking and written 4 books over the course of the last 23 years. And one of the things I'd really like to do is become a board member on you know, worthy organizations or companies. I feel like at this point that I have the strategic insights to really help and to contribute to a board, because it's not
Yeah.
about the actual, you know, day-to-day doing it. It's about oversight, you know, strategic oversight. And that's something that I'd like to look into in the future. I think that would be a very new thing for me. And I think I'd be pretty good at it. And I think I could
Yeah.
contribute to organizations in that capacity. That's what I've got on
Yeah.
my goals for 2025, is to start pursuing that and start talking.
Yeah.
And again, start talking to people. You know, talking to people is the greatest thing in the world. I mean, if you've ever known somebody who's been out of a job, the number one piece of advice that they get is tell everybody. Tell
Yeah.
everybody that you're looking for a job, because that's how people think, oh, that's right. I
Yeah.
was talking to Paul. He's actually looking for a new position. You should talk to him. And, you know, so I'm kind of doing that. I'm talking to organizations and businesses and my clients and stuff about board positions, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. Well, because you don't want it to be a situation where years down the track it comes up and they go, "Oh, I never knew that you wanted to be a director. We had a perfect role for you, but we never knew." You know,
And
you
that's
don't want
exactly
that.
it. One of my best clients, I was talking to him about this, and he was helping me. He was giving me some tips and insights on how to go about this. And he said, you know, Kelly, he said, we just filled a board position that you would have been a very strong candidate for. And I was like, ah, yeah, so we'll see. I'm just going to keep talking to people.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, look, just in life in general, I feel like people talk about luck, and I don't subscribe to luck in the sense that a lot of people often talk about it. I believe that it's all about activity. If you want good things to happen, you've got to be out there doing stuff. You've got to be talking to people. If
Yep.
you're at home doing nothing, not talking to people, well, not much is going to happen in a positive way. You know, odds are,
Exactly.
you know. So, you know, people complain about, oh, someone's more lucky, but are they, or is it just so they're out and about doing more stuff, interacting with a lot of other people, creating a lot more opportunities than what you are, because you're sitting back and just waiting for it to all happen for you?
Right. And there's an expression, maybe you've heard it, the harder I work, the luckier I get, right?
Yeah.
And so the luckiest people I know are the ones who work their butts off, always have, are engaged in the business world and in their communities, and they're just, they're doing stuff. But it's also about, and I just want to put a fine point on this, which is it's about saying yes to those opportunities that come your way that might seem really odd or random. And instead of saying no, just be like, tell me more. When I got that call from Wiley about a book that I never wanted to write, and actually it was a pain in the butt to write, and it was hard, and there were rules and all that kind of stuff, it changed the course of my career entirely. That one thing that I said yes to that I did not want to say yes to, but I did, changed my fee. It changed my notoriety. It gave me credentials and access to stuff. It changed everything. All because I said, okay, I'm willing to write a book. I don't know if I'm going to be any good at it, but I'll try.
Yeah.
Say yes.
Well, I just think of going to your website and not knowing what I now know and looking at it, and it's got about all your different #1 selling books on it. So to look at that first and then talk to you and hear that you didn't even plan to be an author is quite a revelation, because if you looked at the website, you think that's what you're all about, and presumably that's what you've always been about. And it was just fate, or whatever you want to describe it as.
It was fate. And I had nothing to do with that, but I had everything to do with saying yes. That was the part that if I turned that down, I don't even know what my career for the last 13 years would have looked like. I really don't.
The thing is too, is that you were out and about in the world doing stuff. You're busy, you were talking, and that's what created the opportunity. If you weren't doing that, that would never have come along. But it's just because you were doing so much out there, that some of your material happened to get into the hands of the right person, and the opportunity came along.
I have a phrase that I like to use with people, and it's about business growth. And I just say, the more you do, the more you do.
Yeah.
So the more you do, whether you're talking to people or actually just, being part of different groups or, organizations, so the more you do, the more you do. And I mean that in a good way. Like the more business you do, the more business, the more you do, the more you do.
Yeah.
It's been completely true for me.
Yeah. So just to wrap this up, Kelly, is there any sort of tips or that you'd like to offer people as to what they should be doing in order to enhance the opportunity for them to achieve their goals in life? What do you see are the keys?
I would first of all say that for a lot of people, actually figuring out what their goals are is really hard. And I think you got to crystallize that. You can't just be like, I need to set some goals. Well, what do you want to do? Do some introspection, do some reflection. Nobody knows you better than you, and when I read that one book that said, what every time in your life that you've had an attaboy or an attagirl, what were you doing? Because that gets to your gifts, and your gifts don't have to be your goals. They don't have to be tied together. But for me, they were, And so I think it starts with just understanding what do you want? What do you want? Do you want to retire early? Do you want to have, what are your goals? And be clear about those. And I think creating real tangible goals takes some real thought and time. Like, I don't think you can just fire them off, and then start, peeling the onion and going, well, how's that going to happen for me? And start doing the things that make goals happen. And I'll go back to the bakery example. So let's just say you're like, I always wanted to start a bakery. Well, starting a bakery requires a lot of equipment and a lot of cash, and all that kind of stuff, and a lease, and everything. Maybe start by working in a bakery to actually see if you like it.
Yeah.
No, seriously, it sounds so pedantic. It sounds so basic. But like, a lot of people have these dreams of, I want to work for myself and stuff. Well, go work for somebody else in the industry that you're interested in and see what you learn and see if you like it, and then apply that to, well, what would be the next step then? And just start to really crystallize your goals and work on them. And all of this comes with a lot of hard work, a lot.
Yeah. And I guess that's a message for people too. I feel that society these days, even more so, that we're looking for instant gratification. We're wanting things to happen quickly. That's a great way for people to make money, is taking advantage of that fault in their personalities. So the promise of amazing body overnight, you don't have to do much, or promise that I've got the business idea that's going to make you a fortune overnight and without having to do anything. People fall for that all the time because in general, people are inherently lazy, but the reality is you've got to work hard.
Yes.
There's no shortcut.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many times over my 23-year career as a professional speaker that I've had aspiring speakers, wannabes, want to pick my brain. And how did you become so successful? And I'm like, I worked my ass off. I said yes to every engagement. And like I said, I'll bet I did 50 to 90 free ones in the beginning, because you have to have credibility. You've got to be able to say what organizations you've worked with. And a lot of people just don't want to work that hard. That's what that became very clear to me very quickly, is that people would lose interest when I was giving them, here's the blueprint. Here's my playbook. Here's how it worked for me. They were like, oh, wow, that's a lot of work. I'm like, do you think Taylor Swift became as successful as she became by just playing a few songs on her guitar? No. She is the hardest working person in showbiz, period, globally, bar none. Yeah. And none of it's by accident. So,
and that's a consistent theme through all the people I've interviewed, is that they all have worked very hard. And that's what set them apart from others in their industry, is because they've been more committed than the others. They've worked that much harder to achieve their goal.
And the fallacy in terms of, if you have people who are self-employed or would like to be self-employed, is, all these commercials that'll be like, be your own boss, set your own hours. Set your own hours? Are you kidding me? Every person who's self-employed works 12 to 18 hours a day. I mean, I would love to have a week off. I don't get it. It just doesn't happen. And so that's part of it too, is understanding in a real world situation what it takes to work for yourself or start your own company or something. And it takes a lot of grit, and it takes a lot of time, it takes money, and it takes perseverance. It's just not easy. And that's why most people don't do it.
I think one other thing, and it's interested to hear your feedback, but for me too, is that you've got to enjoy what you're doing. Like if you're working really hard, but you don't enjoy it, at some point you'll quit. But if you really love it, like you really enjoy it, that's what will get you over the hill, in my opinion.
From my experience, I love teaching. I love watching the light bulb go off in somebody's eyes, whether it was a client when I was working in the ad agency industry and they were finally like, oh, okay, I see what the issue is, or whatever. And audiences, that is the most gratifying thing in the world. I am not doing it to stand on stage and think that I'm a hotshot. I like watching the material that I'm presenting to somebody land. I can see it in their eyes when it does, when they're like, oh, I never thought about that, and giving them ideas for growing their own businesses or their own organizations. That is what gets me out of bed every morning and just keeps me going all these years.
Yeah. Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kelly. It's been a long time in coming, but it's been well worth the wait. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. Sorry?
Thank you for having me.
No, it's been amazing. And the great thing is you're going to stay on, and we're going to do a little segment called Read to Succeed in a moment. But for this interview, thank you so much. Great to be talking to someone from the lovely state of Colorado. So thank you.